Hey everyone, it's Helen from SMB Deal Hunter. Today we have Kevin Rapport with us, an entrepreneur who has acquired five self-storage companies across 11 locations. I'm super excited to hear Kevin's story. Kevin, it's great to have you on today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Kevin, let's get started with your background. How did you get into self-storage? What were you doing before? Want to hear more.
Yeah. So self-storage is actually relatively new for me. We started in early 2023, started kind of learning about the business in 2022, but didn't make our first purchase until 2023. So before that, for the last 15 years before that, we had invested in single family homes and small multi-units, primarily around college campuses. Um, and then we would just rent them out to college students on 1 year leases. And so a business kind of came from that. Actually started buying houses while I was in college at the University of Arizona. So I bought my first house at 19, and then it just kind of snowballed from there. Um, I think I mentioned to you that's when the financial crash was, right? So this is 2008, 2009. Nobody's buying houses. I was the only idiot 19-year-old with my buddy who was buying houses. But we knew that we could rent them out to our friends. We knew what they would pay. We knew what college kids looked for in a house. And so we were able to kind of create this business of buying houses when nobody else was and renting them out uh, to our friends, really. And that snowballed into kind of creating a couple businesses off the side of that, which was a property management company and a construction company. And we kind of kept that going. Um, so I've been investing in single family and small multi since then. I also became a fireman, something I had wanted to do since I was a kid. So I became a fireman 15. I'm busy. I do the single family home thing. I do the multifamily. I'm a fireman, and now I'm transitioned into buying self storage businesses.
I'm curious, what was the reasoning behind the transition towards self-storage? You seem to have good success single family. Um, why get into self-storage? And plus, you have a full-time job.
Yeah, good question. And that was part of it. I wasn't ready to give up being a fireman. I still really enjoy the job. But the single family home business was taking a lot of my time. You're dealing with tenants where everything's an emergency, right? They live in that home. So if there's a water leak, if there's a roof issue, if they get locked out of their house, if anything happens, it's an emergency because they live there. Self-storage is the opposite. There's very few emergencies, which is great for someone who has a full-time job that can't just be on call dealing with emergencies. So self-storage is just, it's a metal box. There's only so much that can go wrong. And so I like the simplicity of it. COVID was a big turning point for me because during COVID, a lot of tenants were granted leniency in paying their rent, but I wasn't necessarily granted leniency in paying my mortgage. And so there was a push and pull there, and I just saw the handwriting on the wall, and I was like, I don't like where we're going with this, not being able to collect rent, not being able to evict, but still being beholden to a loan that I had. And so self-storage doesn't follow those same tenant laws that single family or multi-unit family. They follow what's called lien laws. And lien laws are very cut and dry and simplistic. I like simple things. And so the lien law states that if you don't pay your bill within about 30 days, state dependent, I can place a lien on your contents, which means I can lock you out of your unit. If you continue to not pay your bill for up to 60 days, then I can auction your contents and I can get that unit rent ready for somebody else. So instead of going through a year eviction process, spending a bunch of money on attorneys, feeling terrible about getting somebody out of their house, it's just very simple. It's contents. I'm not dealing with a human who's living there, and it just made life easier for me.
No, that's super interesting. I didn't know about the lien laws. How did you find the first, I guess, self-storage facility that you're now operating?
Yeah, so the first one was it was listed. It was listed on Crexi, LoopNet, all the commercial real estate sites. And it was 2023 when rates had just completely gone crazy and nobody was, most people were pencils down. And so I knew, especially from kind of being involved in real estate during the crash, that this was not forever kind of thing, and I was still open to buying. I wasn't going to let rates dictate whether or not I buy, just let it dictate how I buy it or what my offer consisted of. And so we were able to find a good deal that was listed, that was a value add property, that had below market rents, low occupancy. It was really ugly. It didn't look good. There was no marketing involved. There's no website. So we were able to find all these value add things that we were looking for and make an offer on it and purchase that one.
How did you diligence the deal? Like, how did you know that, you could fill this, I guess, this property or these units?
Yeah, so there's a lot of due diligence that goes into it, and there's a lot of learning. So my learning started about 6 months prior to my first acquisition, and I actually found a coach, which is funny because I was adamantly against business coaches. I'm like, I had never had one before. I feel like I built somewhat of a successful real estate business, and I just thought it was people just trying to make money off other people, right? And then I found a good coach, and it completely changed my perspective. And this business coach was specific to self-storage. He'd been in the industry for 20 years, knew the ins and outs, knew what to look for. We both went to the facility. He met me there. We walked through it. And he kind of just held my hand through the whole process. And that gave me the confidence I needed to actually pull the trigger, make the offer, knowing that I had him behind me and that he had done this before. And now that's obviously spurred into, multiple facilities since then.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, what were some of the learnings from, what did you learn from the coach? What were some of the things that he pointed out that I guess you didn't know before then?
Everything. I didn't know anything about self-storage. All I knew was that I liked how simple it was. And the fact that it wasn't going to take as much time as my single family portfolio. I knew that. And so I figured I could figure out everything else. And he taught me how to underwrite the deal. What are we looking for when we're trying to pull value add levers? How can we increase occupancy? How can we get our rates up? How do you do a market analysis so you know what are the potential for your rates? So he taught me nuts and bolts storage, but then also helped me just with my confidence in kind of being able to pull the trigger on an unknown asset class and just having somebody there as a sounding board to bounce questions off us when they came up, and there was a lot of questions. That really helped drive my confidence to say, hey, I just need to pull the trigger. And then once you pull the trigger, you're in it and you just have to figure it out. Like, yes, I had help, but at the end of the day, it was me. It was my investment. It was my purchase. It was my capital. And once you do it, you just have to figure out there's no other option, right? You bought it and you got to figure it out. So it's just asking him, asking other people in the industry, reaching out, trying to make connections, just learning as much as possible while doing. Because you can only learn so much before you pull the trigger. And you could learn forever and never buy something. And so he got me to the point where I would buy it. And then after that, it was just learn while doing.
No, that makes a lot of sense. What were some of I mean, I guess I'm curious, what were some of the things that he taught you to look for or that you ended up looking for, in that deal that, subsequently these future deals?
Yeah. So I think it's important to identify your buy box. Like, what is it that you want to buy? And that has to do with at a facility level, and then also has to do with at a market level. And so for me personally, and everyone has their own buy box. But the buy box that we've developed is we're going to buy in tertiary markets, which is like a third tier market. So not the big city, not the suburb next to the big city, but the city 20 miles away from that. Small population, under 20,000. And the reason we're buying here is because we don't have the competition of sophisticated operators in these cities. We don't have the public storages. We don't have the extra space. It's a very unsophisticated market. And so our goal is to be the most sophisticated facility in an unsophisticated market. And that's kind of our core of how we're winning right now. Because if I don't have to compete with the varsity, but I can compete with the freshmen, I'm going to do that all day.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
And so I just eliminated anyone who's better than me. That was my goal in choosing the market. But then I also looked at demographics. I wanted a median income over 55,000. Once you start dipping below 55,000, you have more late tenants, you have more auctions, you have more problems. And so I wanted a higher median income. I wanted a growing population over the last 5 years. I didn't, at least not declining. I wanted there to be growth so that these are all long-term holds for us that, we see ourselves operating this well into the future. So he helped me evaluate the market, helped me kind of dial in on what I was looking for. And then he helped me dial in the facility. And when we look at a facility, the things that we're really looking for are a mom and pop operator that's owned it forever, that isn't operating it to its full potential. They haven't raised rates. So I want a facility that has lower rates than the competition. I want a facility that maybe even has lower occupancy than the competition. I want a facility that doesn't have a website. You can't rent a unit online. You can't pay online. You have to pay cash or check. The mom and pop isn't answering their phone when people call to rent a unit. Like, these are all value add things that I can come in and fix very quickly, and get it operating sophisticated to a point where I'm now the most sophisticated in that market.
And where was that first unit? What
That one
market
was
was
in
that
North
in?
Carolina. Yeah, so we're in North Carolina, Kentucky, South Carolina, and North Dakota.
Mm. And you've been operating these remotely because you're not living in any of those places. Am I correct?
You know, we're in California, and so that was another big learning curve for me. And I had some confidence going into this because I did operate a single family and multifamily portfolio remotely. So there was a level of just knowing real estate and knowing that it was possible. But again, it was a new asset class to me. And so the way we've set up our facilities is all for remote management. We have a 1099 contractor at each facility that we pay. I call them our boots on the ground. And they do what we need to do around the facility. So if somebody doesn't pay, they put our lock on their unit so that they can't get in until they pay. If we have to auction a unit, they're there to cut the lock, take pictures of it, and we do online auctions. So they're kind of my eyes and ears. And then in combination with that, we have a call center that answers all of our calls. And they field all inbound calls. And then as things come up, if tenants have questions, they reach out and assist with that. So between the call center and the boots on the ground, it makes my job a lot easier where I can focus more on high level operations and managing revenue and things like that.
And is the call center also onshore, offshore? What does that look like?
It's a US based call center. There's a few big ones for self-storage. We use one of them. They do have offshore employees. They are US based, but it's primarily during business hours. You're going to get a US based employee that's going to answer the phone.
No, that's super interesting. I mean, it seems like the team is pretty lean to run this. You don't really have to have many full-time employees, I'm guessing.
No, we don't have a single employee. They're all contractors or people that we hire that have businesses like the call center. So I am essentially the property manager. But for me, all I'm really doing is approving or denying requests that the call center comes to me that they don't have the authority to answer. Like if a tenant goes to them with a question that they might not be able to answer, they would come to me. I would answer that question. And then marketing, promotions, managing revenue on existing tenants, when to raise rates, all that type of stuff. Any kind of third-party contractors. If a door breaks, who's going to fix it? I got to go find that person, right? Or if a roof is leaking, that's on me. But as far as like the nitty-gritty day-to-day operations, between that boots on the ground and call center, they're handling 80% of it.
That's super interesting. And how many units are does each of your facility have, or do you target?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It varies amongst facility. Typically, it makes most sense if you don't look at it at a unit perspective, but you look at it at a revenue perspective. What makes sense to be able to afford a call center, the boots on the ground, the management software, some of these fixed costs that you're going to have. You really need a facility that's going to generate around at least $85,000 a year in gross. Now that might be a facility that's 70 units, or it might be a facility that's 150 units to get to that 85,000 gross. But that's the number we target, is a gross revenue exceeding 85,000, because then we know our expense ratio will be under 35%. If we start acquiring a facility that has a gross revenue of 40,000, 50,000, 60,000, our expense ratio is going to go up because of those fixed costs. And so we're comfortable with a 35% expense ratio. In order to do that, we need 85,000 gross.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Is that kind of industry standard or something you guys set for yourselves?
Yeah, no, it is. I think most people operate somewhere between 27 and 40% expenses on their gross. And again, that's looking at a gross of at least 85,000. If you start getting less than that, your fixed costs are going to eat up a lot of that, and you're going to be over 50%. And so for us, we've kind of drawn the line there to where 35% expenses we're good with, and an 85K gross.
That makes sense. And how do you value these facilities? How do you know you're getting a good deal, or what are you looking at?
Yeah, that's a good question. And as we acquire more, that's obviously a big part of what I do, right? And on the acquisition side is how do I value this facility? If you're familiar with real estate at all, they're essentially assigned a capitalization rate. And so all that is saying is, if I spend X number of dollars, I'm okay earning X% on that. Most facilities that we're buying in kind of these third tier markets are going to be right around an 8 cap, which means if I buy it for 100,000, I should expect to net after everything $8,000 a year, 8%. If you look at more larger metros, kind of primary, secondary markets, those are going to trade at a lower capitalization rate. So they're going to be around like anywhere from a 5.5 to 7 cap. And so if you buy one of those for 100,000, you're basically going to be saying, hey, I'm okay making $7,000 as opposed to 8,000.
And how are you financing these deals? Or how did you finance your first deal? Have you continued to finance it the same way since?
Yeah, so the first deal, we were fortunate that we had the single families that we had sold, and we just kind of moved that money into the first deal. But that only took us so far. And so on future deals, ideally what we do is we get seller financing. Like that's our number one goal in any acquisition, is try to get the seller to finance the note. I don't like dealing with banks. I never have. It wasn't even an option when I started single family in 08, 09. There were no banks were touching anything. And so maybe that's why I didn't grow up doing the bank thing. And so for me, it's seller financing number one, it's private money number two, it's equity partners number three, and my last resort is go to a bank. The other thing you can do with self-storage that's unique to real estate, because self-storage is a business, not just an asset, is you can get an SBA loan. But there's a lot of hoops to jump through to do that. And so that's probably, that and the bank are kind of my last resort.
That makes sense. Yeah, I don't hear of a lot of folks getting an SBA loan to buy a self-storage unit. So I'm curious what that process is like. I guess even with seller financing, how much are you asking the sellers to finance? Like what percent is achievable in this space right now?
Yeah, I've seen sellers finance up to 95% of the sale. Everything's negotiable. The goal is just to try and come up with a win-win, just like any business that you're buying with the seller. And so there's different leverage you can pull, but trying to find what's their pain point and how can you solve their problem? What do they need, right? Do they need X amount of money per month in order to retire? Okay, we can get them to X amount of money per month, and then we just adjust the purchase price and the note term and the interest rate to do it. Or do they want, a larger down payment because they want to go buy something else? Okay, well, that's fine. We can do a larger down payment, but then we're going to adjust the interest rate. We're going to adjust the term and things like that. And so it really just is all about working with the seller, trying to find a win-win. What is it that they want? And then trying to craft a agreement that kind of fits their needs. If that makes sense.
No, that doesn't. Would you say most sellers are open to seller financing? Is it pretty rare? What does that look like?
I'd say it's 50-50. we have a lot of sellers that maybe even more on the seller financing side. We have a lot of sellers that are open to seller financing because we're targeting mom and pop. They've owned it forever. They bought it for 50,000 in the 70s, and now they're selling it to me for 7, 8, 900,000. Right? That's a huge tax windfall they're about to have. And so seller financing kind of kicks that can down the road. It also gets them more money over the long term because I'm making interest payments. And so there's a lot of ways to sell seller financing, and it does work for a lot of people for a variety of reasons, whether that's monthly income, the security that entails, not paying a bunch of taxes, whatever it is. Usually you can find a way to work in seller financing that might suit their needs.
Got it. And when you had to get a private money, what or even equity partners, what are some of the terms that you're working with there?
Yeah, so I haven't brought on equity partners for ours. I try not to if I don't have to. I have invested as a limited partner in a number of other deals as an equity partner. There's tons of different structures there. Typically, it's going to be around 70% to the LP, 30% to the GP. And so they're gonna take a piece of it for operating it, finding it, running it. And then I'm going to take the rest as a limited partner. For our deals, if we aren't able to obtain seller financing or we need more than that, we'll go private. We've worked with a lot of debt partners in the past in our single family home days. And so we just kind of knock on their doors first to see if they would like to loan on the property, sometimes in a second position to the seller. Sometimes if the seller's not open to seller financing, it would be on the entire property. We'd give them a first deed of trust on the property. And interest rates vary. I would say standard, I think we have a little more leverage because we've worked with these people in the past, but someone who's starting out somewhere between 10 and 12% interest to a private money, it's essentially a hard money loan.
Yeah.
And with the goal would then be to rehab it, increase that net income. Now it's worth more. Now you go to a bank. Now I'm okay going to the bank, refinancing it, pulling money out, paying off that debt partner. And now you're left with your traditional, right now, whatever it is, 6.75% rate.
Yep. No, that makes sense. I'm curious with the first deal, once you close that, obviously it's a little bit different from your classic real estate deals. It's an operating business. What did those first 30 days look like? You mentioned there was a lot of room for improvement in the deals you're looking at. So what were some of the things you went in and sort of implemented immediately?
Yeah. Well, here we just closed on one in North Dakota last week on Tuesday.
Congrats.
Thanks. So I'm like in it right now, so I can talk about exactly all my problems I'm having right now. But here's our kind of standard playbook, and I'll take just the North Dakota one for example. We came in, we buy it, it's mom and pop. We need to put it on some sort of management software. There's a number of them out there. Easy Storage Solutions, SiteLink, Cubby. They all have pros and cons. So we choose a management software. We integrate with that management software, which means all of our tenants now are uploaded into that software. We have a website and they can log in online. When they log into their portal, they'll have an individual portal. They can pay their rent. They can move into another unit. They can move out of their unit. They can ask questions. They can get their gate code. Everything's kind of individualized, right? So that's the first step. You've got all these tenants. Usually the mom and pops keep them in an Excel document, or maybe it's in a file folder. You're putting all that information into the back end of the management software. Now everyone has a portal and you have a website. The next thing that you need to do is everyone's paying with check or cash, or a lot of people are because these mom and pops weren't taking credit card. So now what we do, and not everybody does this, but I don't want to go to my mailbox and deal with checks and checks bouncing, and I want to go on vacation and someone saying they sent me a check. It's a nightmare. So we don't do any checks. So now I'm calling all these customers, or the call center is saying, hey, I'm sorry, we're not taking checks anymore. You have multiple options. You can do ACH online with your account and routing number. You can do credit card, or you can do debit card. So please go to your portal and upload your payment information. So now
And how hard is it to get them to go from this like old school cash and check to now creating an account, going through the portal and actually updating their payment option? Is that kind of a drag or?
50% of them are happy. They're like, thank God, I hate driving down there and giving my check every month. Or, man, they lost my check in the mail. Like, I want to get the credit card points. That's 50%. 30% of them are like, okay, whatever, we'll do it. Like, this is annoying, but we'll do it, no problem, right? 20% of them are like, F you, I'm moving out. You know, like, I don't have a credit card. I don't use a credit card. I don't give my credit card number out, right? They've been doing this forever. And I don't blame them, right? They're used to it. They're older. They don't want to deal with credit cards. Maybe they really don't have one. And so it's those 20% that take the most time, and you're working with them. But we do draw a line in the sand and we say, maybe we'll accept a check for one more month, but we are not going to accept checks. And if you do want to pay with check, we're just not the facility for you. And so I'm okay losing that customer and getting another customer in that's not going to pay with check.
I'm curious how many customers you lose because moving all your stuff out of self-storage and putting into another unit is not exactly the thing that most people are excited about doing. So,
Totally.
what would you
They're,
say
they're
is common
very,
there?
they're very sticky customers, is probably the best word to describe self-storage customers, which is good, especially when you're increasing rates, because oftentimes they just accept the rate change and they might be upset, but they're not going to move out. Typically, when we take over a facility, we expect somewhere between 5 and 10% of the people to move out. It is what it is. They were gonna, no matter what we did, they were just gonna move out. And it didn't really matter about the checks or the portal or the website, or they were gonna move out because they were getting away with things with the old owner that they knew they weren't gonna get away with us. They were paying late, they had bounce checks, whatever it was. And so we just kind of build that into our underwriting. We're gonna lose these people. But then we're going to go out and we're going to hopefully exceed that number that we lost with quality tenants. Our other reason, other than just me not wanting to collect checks, is because we want everybody, if we can, everybody to get on auto pay. So it's just easy, right? It's every month, it hits the card, it comes into our account. They don't have to worry about it. We don't have to worry about it. And it's easy. So when you do checks, obviously you can't do auto pay. That's a big reason why we want people to start paying online.
I guess going back to the playbook, you mentioned sort of putting the management software, getting all these people on there and getting them on auto pay. What happens next? Is increasing rates happening immediately, or how soon after does that happen?
So different people do different things. I know a lot of people that come in and they just day one rate increase. I don't like doing that. I don't know. I just don't. There's a human level to it that I'm like, I don't really want to be that person. Not that it's bad. They have every right to do it. They're all month-to-month leases. That's another benefit of storage compared to single family, right? Single family, I've got to wait a year before I can do anything. Storage, I month to month, I up and down, however I want to do it. But with our playbook, we come in and the first thing we'll add is what we call tenant protection, and we make that mandatory. So usually around month 2 or 3, we require that everybody pays for tenant protection. It's essentially insurance if something happens to their unit, if there's a flood, if there's a disaster, if there's mice, if they're whatever, they have coverage. But we require it. It's $12 a unit, and they get $2,000 worth of coverage. Now we use a third-party insurance company, and so we split that $12 with them. We get $9, and the insurance company gets $3. So that's my first rent raise. I like doing that first because I'm giving something to get something. I'm giving them $2,000 worth of coverage. I'm telling them they have to have it, but I'm giving them the coverage, and they're paying an additional $12. And then after that, depending on what that does to my occupancy, do people move out? Do they accept it without challenge? That kind of guides me in maybe around month 4 to 5, doing my first rate increase. And then around rates, what we'll do is we'll just do samples. So I'll cut the facility into thirds. I will raise a third of the tenants, call it in January. And I'll just kind of see what happens. It's just data points for me. Do a bunch of people move out? Do a bunch of people call upset? Does nobody care? Do I get bad reviews? What happens? And then I take that data and I adjust my rate increase for the next 1/3 customers. So if nobody moved out, okay, cool, I didn't raise it enough. So then on my next third, I raise it a little more. And I see what happens there. Did still nobody move out? okay, I have more room to push it. Then on my last third, I raise it even higher, right? Or in that second group, did a bunch of people move out? Okay, I probably hit that threshold of where people, are where they're willing to pay. And now maybe I don't go as high on that third rev, right? So I use data points. And then we're just consistently managing that revenue. So every 4 to 8 months, there's going to be a rate increase of some kind on your unit.
That's interesting. And what you know, kind of retention are you trying to aim for? Like after that initial sort of 5 to 10% that leave, what are you trying to, how many of these customers are you trying to keep every year?
Yeah, it's a good question because again, I focus it on the revenue. So I can drop in occupancy, but if I raised rates enough on enough people, I can actually increase my revenue, even while losing customers. So where do I want to be occupancy wise? Ideally, I want to be somewhere between 85 and 90%. If I'm above 90%, especially in the high 90s, I'm charging too little. Something's wrong. If I'm way below 85, I'm probably charging too much or something's going on to where I'm not getting customers. And so where I consider it stabilized is right around 85 to 90% occupancy. And ideally, the rents that take me to that occupancy are right what people are willing to pay. If I bump it up more, I'm going to get move outs. And if I charge too much less than that, I'm going to have a higher occupancy, but my revenue is going to be less because my rates are less.
And how often, I mean, how long does the average tenant stay? Or do you care about that?
Yeah. If you look at the nationwide average, it's 16 months.
Interesting.
And then our average market dependent is less than that most of the places. Typically because we're in kind of growing markets where a lot of people are moving, and when you're moving, you don't necessarily need it for 16 months. You need it for 3-4 months, so that brings down our average a lot. And we're also managing our revenue, so we're increasing rates, which is eventually going to push people out. We'll get more people in at that higher rate, but the older people are going to get pushed out. So our average is probably right around, I'd have to look, but it's probably 10-11 months per customer, which is, a little less than the nation average.
What is just acquiring these customers? You mentioned the playbook, but you mentioned, part of the reason that these deals are often attractive to you is because they're underoccupied. So how are you bringing these new tenants in when you take over? Is that something you focus on initially?
Yeah, so it all starts with location. 70% of the battle is location. If you're off a main street, you're fighting an uphill battle. So we want to be on a main street, and we want the biggest sign we can have. Self-storage is one of those things that you don't need it until you need it. And then when you need it yesterday. And so we don't have the advantage of kind of sending out a letter saying, hey, look, we have this self-storage. So if you're going to get that, if you don't need self-storage, you're going to be like, okay, cool, I don't care. So we want to be front of mind whenever it is that you do need it. And typically the best way to do that is be on a busy road with a lot of traffic and a big sign. And then you do all the online stuff. So we have a marketing company that we hire that does all the SEO work, all the organic traffic. And then we run ads if we need to. So we'll run Google ads. We've messed with Facebook ads, but Google ads are probably the best in the markets that we're in. And so a combination of kind of all of those things kind of gets us to the occupancy where we want to be.
And do you find that the sort of the on the ground marketing of having the big sign is much more important than digital marketing in this case?
100%. Yeah, we
That's
get a lot of because we ask everybody, how'd you hear about us, right? Good data point to have, and the bulk of them are, oh, I drove by, oh, I saw the sign, and I thought, oh, our garage is getting full, but we need self-storage, so I'm gonna call it, and then you get the traffic that's going to and from work passing your self-storage facility every single day. So when they do finally need it 6 months from now, they just think, oh, whatever the storage, XYZ storage, I know that, I'm gonna call them. Now, where the website traffic comes into play are people who are out of the area and who maybe are moving to the area, relocating, whatever it is. That's where you want to be on top of the map pack. You want to, have all the Google reviews. You want to do all the right things there. But if you did nothing but be on a busy road with a giant sign, you're ahead of the game.
Love that. And you would say you are ahead of a lot of the competition, even just by having a sign, or
Um, well, I think if you look at where we are, we focus on buying facilities in a good location. And so um, most everyone has a sign, right? But if they're on back roads, no one's going to see it. And so a lot of our competition in these areas are not on the main street. They're off the beaten path. And so just being on a main street uh, helps a lot with self-storage.
I guess going back to the call center, seems like those folks are critical to the operations of the business, but also even early on in converting these people to, this new system, payment system, things like that. How do they get compensated generally?
Yeah, so they're a third party company, and then they charge owners like myself a fee per unit. So on mine, depending on, we have a couple different call centers, we use anywhere from $3 to $4 a unit per month. And that's how they get compensated from us. And then obviously they're managing a lot of other portfolios, so that combines for the business revenue, and then they have to pay out their employees who are actually on the phones. But from an owner's point of view, we overestimate $4 a unit per month. And I kind of look at it as, well, if I can just bump rents $4 per unit per month, then my call center's paid for. And so
Makes sense.
the charge is actually a super high value for what you're paying. Like $4 a month is not that much. But for me not to have to deal with, no one knows my phone number, no one knows where I live, no one has my mailing address. Like, I don't get the call when the tenant's upset. They deal with it. Now I have to manage them and make sure they're doing what they're telling me they're doing, and audit their calls. And I listen to some of their calls and critique and say, hey, next time, please do this, or hey, great job here. I really like what you did. Or I try and come up with ways to incentivize them. Like, we're taking over this new facility. And I'm going to give it, if they can get 75% of people on auto pay, I'm going to give them all $500 Visa gift cards. And so I self incentivize that way, outside of just paying the standard, $4 a unit.
That's great. Are these people dedicated to your facility or the people
No,
that work there?
multiple facilities. So it's basically a bunch of people in a room. Sometimes they work from home, but they're always in front of their computer. They're supposed to answer the phone within a couple rings. On busy days, especially around the first of the month, sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes the phone doesn't get answered. But no, they answer the phone for my facility, and then they might get a call for another facility right after they hang up with my customer. And then it's the call center's job to manage the bandwidth of the callers and make sure that they're not putting too many facilities on one caller, because obviously they can only answer one call at a time.
I'm curious, you mentioned you work with a couple different call centers. What's the reasoning for that? Given, you have these facilities, why not all use just the same call center? Very, very curious.
Yeah. I think the short version is, no one's like super happy with their call center. Nobody is like, I have the best call center and I love them and they're perfect. And so I kind of just wanted to try somebody else to see where the pros and cons were. I'm also looking to bring the call center in-house either this year or next year. And so just to get kind of data and experience working with two different call centers, kind of choosing what did I like that they're doing, what don't I like, I thought would help me eventually bring that call center in-house. I think we're kind of at the tipping point of where that we're at the scale where maybe that makes sense to justify that expense. But we would definitely be able to have much more control over the calls. It would be a better customer experience for us to be managing it as opposed to a third party who doesn't own the facility. There's definitely there's some situations that occur where you wish it was handled differently, but if you don't have control and they're not in-house and they're not your employees, that's tough to manage,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious with what your role like is. You mentioned that some of the things you focus on, but How many hours are you putting into this on a weekly basis or even on a daily basis? What does your day-to-day look like, with your full-time job as a fireman?
Yeah. Um, it varies so much. So when we take over a facility, it's long days. Um, it's probably 2 weeks of just me being in front of a computer. I'm like kind of in it right now. Starting to slow down from when we took over last week, but there's just a lot to do. Once the facility, well, let me step back. Once you get everybody onboarded and you have all your systems in place, then you have to take time to manage rates, try and drive occupancy, do the things that you need to do to operate, and kind of figure out what makes most sense there. Those are half days for a couple weeks. And then once it's stabilized, and it's at a point where you have your customer base, you're at that 85% occupancy, your gross income is close to where you want it, then it's very much hands off, and you're just putting out little fires as they come in from the call center. And I would say once it gets to that point, it's maybe, I don't know, on average 2 hours a week per facility, if that. And it just ebbs and flows, kind of like just entrepreneurship in general, right? It's like everything seems to just happen at once, and then all of a sudden you'll have a few weeks where you're like, I didn't really do anything these 2 weeks. And that's obviously the goal. That's where you want it to be. But as we keep acquiring more, we keep getting into these busy seasons, but then other ones slow down behind us. So we're in a good place where I can manage it, still spend time with the family, which is super important. 2 young kids, and obviously still be a fireman at this point.
And how do you plan on, I guess, bringing on someone at your, I guess, main office, i.e. you, if you will? You mentioned even the 2 hours a week, but sort of, with like 11 facilities, that obviously still adds up. How do you think about that? Do you think you're gonna bring on someone to replace kind of your role right now at all?
Yeah, and I guess I should clarify too, because a number of those facilities are under the same brand. I'm kind of looping that all into a 2 hour span there. So I'm probably 10 hours a week on it.
Okay.
I actually get a lot of stuff done at the fire station because we have a lot of downtime in between calls and training and eating and everything else. So I'm actually able to knock out a good amount of work kind of in those lull down times or after dinner times at the fire station. So that helps me stay present with the family when I am home. But I am considering, again, I think we're at this tipping point where we start bringing more things in house, like the call center, and then the next, maybe potentially even first move would be more of an operations manager. Actually, just I don't have social media other than Twitter or X, and I just posted on there like, hey, if anybody is interested in being an operations manager, and I would kind of look at it as an operations partner, that might be our next hire. Um, Trying to figure out what all that would look like, what that would entail, the roles and responsibilities. But I do think we're getting to the point where it would be nice to kind of put a separation between me and our call center, our boots on the ground, our marketing team, all these third-party contractors. To have somebody kind of managing that, I think would help us and would give my time back to where then I could focus more on acquisitions and maybe some of the higher level operational type stuff.
That makes sense. And I guess I'm curious, are you doing this for for a long-term hold? Are you hoping to just kind of cash flow off these forever? What's sort of the goal with, continuing to build this portfolio?
Yeah, the goal is a long-term hold. Um, we're not gonna just we're gonna be opportunistic in the market. The goal with our single-family portfolio is to hold that forever as well. And then 21 came around and we're like, well, we're gonna sell because this makes sense, right? So, yes, right now the goal is a long-term hold, but we're not going to allow ourselves to be blind. And if a great opportunity presents to sell one or multiple facilities, we'll look at that as the time comes.
That's great. I know we're at time, but final question, what's caused you to sort of double down on self-storage? You've initially bought one not that long ago, what, like
Uh,
2 years ago?
8 years ago,
Uh,
yeah,
Crazy. And you've bought, quite a few more facilities since then.
yeah.
What's led you to sort of double down and continue to buy these facilities?
I think it's just the simplicity of it. It's easier to run than what we had been doing in the past. And so we're just gonna keep going. We'll add in people in key spots when we need to. But the the simplistic nature of self-storage is nice and kind of it's a good way for us to earn cash flow, not have a huge time suck into the asset class or into the business, and still be able to do other things that we like to do.
That's great. Kevin, thank you so much for your time today. I guess final question,
Yeah.
any sort of final words of wisdom for folks out there that kind of want to replicate what you're doing, maybe go and buy a self-storage facility of their own.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to make money. There's so many intriguing businesses that are fun and exciting. I wouldn't say self-storage is the thing you have to do, but I will say I think it's a avenue to build wealth and create cash flow. And so if anyone's interested, I'm happy to talk to them. They can reach out to me on X, or you can share my contact information. But I think looking back at why I was able to achieve, I'll call it success, in my standards, but why I was able to achieve success kind of quicker than maybe some other folks was because I just learned by doing, and two, I hired a coach and a mentor who was able to help me kind of guide me through the process. And I would kind of advise people to really look strongly at finding someone in the industry to be a coach, be a mentor, even if you have to pay them, and just soak up as much knowledge as you can. But at a certain point, you have to just learn by doing. And so don't let learning get in the way of actually doing.
That's great advice. And if you feel comfortable sharing, what are you guys cash flowing every month now with all these facilities? And do you kind of have a goal, or are you just going to keep investing in more?
Yeah, we'll keep investing in more. I probably should have a goal of like where I want to maybe slow down or what I want to get to. Right now, I think we're just in it. We like it. We're just going to buy as many as we can. Every facility is different. We have facilities that cash flow. I think our least expensive facility we bought was 350,000. We put some money into it, and maybe at this point, we just bought it a few months ago. It's probably cash flowing, I don't know, maybe $5,000 to $6,000 a month. And we're still building it up. And then we have other facilities that cash flow, hundreds of thousands. And then obviously you have your expenses and your debt on top of that. But a lot of it just depends on the size of the facility, and where it's located, what you can get for your market rents.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much for your time today. Sorry, we went a
Yeah.
little over, but really appreciate, all the knowledge you've just shared. I'm sure other people who watch this are going to feel the same way. So thank you again.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks for having me. That was fun.